Hello, everybody. Welcome to another exciting edition of Victory Never Sleeps. Um, Thank you very much to Whit and Brandy and our guests from last week. Svan and myself were en route to Thorshof for our annual Ostara celebration. Got a little bit more on that here in just a second. As far as updates and such, one of the things that I was kind of tabulating just before the broadcast tonight was our number of families fed through our food pantry. Those of you that might not know, each of our hofs, and we have 4 hofs now, each of our hofs once a month does a food pantry to help be good neighbors to our local communities where our hofs reside, and help people out that may be a little bit extra in need sometimes. So we run the food pantry once a month at each of those locations. And yeah, so we do that. Anyways, I'm sorry, Mandy was in here adjusting something on my desk and I was trying to figure out what she was doing. I apologize for the stutter stop there. Anyway, we all together in the month of March, the Asatru Folk Assembly's food pantries fed 136 families in the communities around our hofs. So that's amazing. Thank you so much to all of our awesome volunteers that put the effort in to make those happen and to make that a reality. It's really a nice situation. Hold on, Mandy, that's not plugged in. Copy that. All right. So, Nick, Mandy says I got an echo. If you can fix that on your end, I'd appreciate it. That said, you need to. All right, cool. So that said, since sorry, I'm all thrown off by that. I apologize. No, we had an amazing weekend. I want to tell you a little bit about it, and then we've got a slideshow video presentation for you guys. That said, yeah, it was a really nice weekend. Record attendance at Thorshof. We had 113 people in attendance, and that is huge. It absolutely looks. It made the Hof feel very small, which was kind of a cool thing. These are all good problems to have, but it was really nice to have a packed house of our folk there to give worship to our gods. Very nice weekend. Met a lot of new folks. Put some names with some faces of, put some faces with some names rather of people who are regulars on this broadcast, which was awesome. Just a really solid event all around. Very quality people. I talked to energized and charged up and just on fire for our gods after that weekend, and I'm certainly still feeling it, so that's great. As I mentioned tonight in the advertising on stuff, and I suppose we'll put this out here before we get to the video, this will be our final episode on the Hávamál. We'll be finishing that up. It's been a really cool journey with you guys, and I appreciate y'all being here for it. So we should be finishing that tonight. Nick has a link that he will put up in the chat for those of you who'd like to follow along. We are using the Bellows translation. As always, feel free to use whatever translation you like. Sometimes they'll put something a little bit differently, and it might enhance the meaning for you. So feel free to take a look at that. Other news, so working on getting Victory Never Sleeps to a bigger audience, to more of our folk, more people who need to hear it or would like to hear it. in that process, we are set up now. The podcast version of this, which usually gets released on Friday, is available on Amazon Music and also on iHeartRadio. So, got some other things we're trying on that, but those are kind of two new developments since last time we spoke. As always, this video broadcast is on YouTube, on Entropy, BitChute, VK, Twitch, and a purple thing that's not coming to me right now. So feel free to check it out then. And without further ado, okay, I'm looking for it. It just got up here with all the different stuff. Odyssey is the one that I couldn't think of, and it's not the purple one. So anyways, it's what it is. Anybody who would like to donate tonight, that's always much appreciated. It goes to the amazing things that we're doing, to getting new Hoffs, to spreading the worship of our gods and bringing our folk home. So we really appreciate that. A lot of fun ways to do that. Those ways are in the description of this video. Little bells and whistles. So we appreciate anybody who wants to do that. As always, we will answer your questions as they relate to what we're talking about during the study portion, and anything that we don't get to, we'll make sure we get to at the end. So never fear. Yeah, with that, Nick, whenever you are prepped and ready, I'm ready for you to roll the Ostara presentation. All right. So, as you can see, quite a big weekend. Absolutely spectacular time was had by all. Thank you to everybody in Thorshoff leadership for making that happen and hosting the event. And I'm looking forward to it next year. If you weren't there this year, we would love to see you next year. Love to see you at other national events between now and then. All right. With that, Svan, are you ready to get Hávamál study?
I don't know. I can't explain it. It was massive amounts of folks, got to meet tons of people, got to talk about great subjects all weekend long. I did miss Sumble, though. I don't know if anybody noticed, but I had my kids. I had to take them back, and by the time I got back, Sumble was well on its way, and I really regret missing it. So I, bringing that up now. I'm sorry for any offense on that end, but I other than that, weekend was perfect. Good. Everything about it, even the light rain that we got wasn't terrible, and everything was nice. And then the rain gave way, and sun and beautiful weather. It was the egg hunt for the children was unmarred by any. I was stressing about that a lot. As far as the weather goes. So it was a great weekend. I'm very, very glad to meet so many people who are in the comments now. I actually know your faces, and I know who you are. So that's awesome.
Yeah, you missed out. The Sumble was one of my favorite Sumbles I've ever been in. It was a really, really good Sumble. Not the biggest Sumble I've ever been in. Some of those can be a slog when there's that many people, but this was a really, really good Sumble with some very beautiful things said over the horn, and really proud of a lot of our people that were celebrated during that Sumble.
Yeah, that's what got me is when you said that, because I know you and I have been to a lot of Sumbles. Some of them are beautiful, some of them are great, some of them are great, some of them moments. But if you were saying, best Sumbles I've ever been at, hits me as like, dang.
Yeah.
I really missed out. But
you were pulling double parent duty there, so I certainly understand that.
Yeah, next time I will sneak in. I was think too much. Hardlining it, I think too much with the idea that I didn't want to come in and break things as they were going. But next time I think I'll try to ghost my way in.
All righty. Well, where are we starting this week?
We're at 152. And we are on the seventh rune song. And by the Arman and by the younger set, this would move us into the Heya rune, as it's called in the younger Dark. I'm not sure about the Arman, and I didn't pull it up.
All right. Yeah, chat room. We're aware there's still some echoing going on. I know that Nick is diligently working to fix that.
Yeah, everything on my end is.
Alrighty. So, without any further ado, let's go ahead and go through 152.
If need be, I might be able to switch over to a headset, but nothing's registering over on my side as being an echo. Do you guys want me to in?
No, I'd like you to just go ahead with 152, and if we could, I don't know, keep some of the troubleshooting to the back channels on this, it'd be nice, and we'll do what we can. And in the meantime, I'm sure our tech folks will try to find solutions.
All right. So we're here at 152. And the Armanen is Hagal, or Hail in the Younger Futhark. This is generally, we're attaching the rune in direct to the song. There's a lot of theories as to perhaps maybe the songs are multiple runes, but we're working from the direct correlations too. And this one is really interesting. It's nice. I think it's very, very clear. A seventh, I know. If I see in flames the hall over my comrades' heads, it burns not so wide that I will not quench it. I know that song to sing. And one of the things about Bellows' translations that causes a lot of confusion is the way that he writes it. A lot of people don't fully know that what he's saying is, it cannot burn so wide, or it cannot burn so strong that I cannot quench it. But it comes out sounding a little, it burns not so wide that I will not quench it. And that kind of throws some folks off. Some of the questions that addressing in relation to Bellows translations over the weekend at Thorshoff was about the beauty of his writing, but some of it like missteps in the way that it's being written or presented. And Goli Bodimeo made a great point. He said it's almost Victorian in its placement and its grammar. And you can kind of see the effectiveness of the language versus, say, like Hollander, another very poetic one, whereas Thorpe has a tendency to cut straight to the bone. There's not a lot of poetics. So when you get these attempts at bringing the poetics back, you get a kind of a little choppiness in here. It burns not so wide that I will not quench it. This usage of that verb, or those words, I mean, just kind of seem a little out of place now.
Yeah, keep in mind that Bellows was doing this work. I mean, I don't know exactly at what point in his life he did this translation, but he was born in 1885.
Right. Yeah, later end of the 1800s. So the usage of things, and again, attempting when the translators attempt to keep the poetics alive and the meter, trying to keep some of the tempo alive, we find, the sense of the words, maybe not so completely like Shakespearean in their construction, but there's flares of it here and there. And I think that because we don't use those words so often or in such a tempo, it throws people off. And this rune, in correlation, if we're talking about Hagel, if we're talking about Hail, in this sense, there is speaking of the rune, the song has the ability to quench the fires. And the interesting translation of comrades, the word in the Old Norse side is sesmogum, and mogum. Ses just means seat. So it's like, but it's most likely referring to a bench. So it's a bench mate or someone that's sitting at the long tables with me. It's a kind of with the speaker. So, seeing the fires over my, fellow benchmates in the long haul, I can speak it and know it and quench it, to lay the fire to sleep. And this, of course, lends itself to the Hail rune. The Hail rune is a rune oftentimes associated with torrents and storms, but also with the subduing or the constraint, but not, or sorry, constraint's not the correct word, blockage of certain primordial powers or the flaring of heat. So hail is kind of seen as that which kind of blocks or keeps things contained. It's the sometimes referred to as the cosmic ice seed, or I know in certain binding and barrier bind runes, hail is often used, or hagalas is often used in relation to keeping things at bay. And here too, another part of the translation, I know that song to sing. Than kan ek galder at galla. He says galder instead of song, which is another reason why sometimes you'll get people who are translating and doing, their scholastics, and they'll be very, very poignant to say these aren't runes, these are songs. But they'll fail to mention that the word song and the word galder are often used interchangeably. But I would say that the better way of knowing it is a galder is a spell. A galder is a culmination of perhaps chant or manifesting of power. It can be as simple as a mantra, but it can also get as complex as a poem or a song. And a collection of those galders could be seen as like lioths or songs. You kind of see the plural versus the singular. But a lot of people get caught up on, is a galder just a sound? And no, it's a spell in modern usage. And in elder usage, it was a magical saying of either words or sounds or things to manifest power.
Can you hear me, Svan?
Yes.
All right, we were having some trouble there a second ago. So a couple of things, and it kind of got, I don't know, we moved past the initial thing I was making, but there's a couple of points I want to make. But before I do, Chris Lucat donated $20. Thank you so much for that. We appreciate your donation. He says, representing Folk Erminsel, for an inside joke, Svan missed at Sumble. Hail Hoff Daddy 88.
I missed that.
Yes. Those of you who are there get it. Those of you who don't, be there next year. Maybe you will get it then. But thank you very much, Chris, for your donation. We appreciate that a lot. So one of the things on this rune, one of the truths that it represents, oftentimes people conceive of certain of our runes as good or bad. And I don't think it doesn't work that way. They represent, I don't know, I guess, fundamental pieces of existence. And just like storms, they're neither good nor bad, they just are. And one can harness benefits from them, or one can take damage from them. And I think that one of the things with some of these runes is not just the straightforward understanding of them, but if you master them, then you have the ability to bend them to the good, to find the opportunity that they present. Hagalas as a rune, certainly in the way that it gets, so okay, we've all seen ideographically the H, or the double barred H with the slanted crossbar, and I think that's the one we see in the Elder Futhark most often. But in the other systems, including the Armanen, it's much more of a snowflake-looking pattern. And the idea of it, it's often the seed rune it contains, because all of our runes are like a collection of straight lines that intersect and do different things off of one another. It's seen as something that you can make lots of different runes out of. It in and of itself is a bind rune in a lot of ways. It represents a lot of potential when there is the storm and tumult. It opens up lots and lots of opportunity. And this is one of the things that I look at when I ask the Nornir to bless a new baby. And this was relevant to baby naming I performed at Ostara. This was one of the runes that was drawn.
Yeah.
So when this happens, I'm asking for a gift. I don't think that they're going to just, throw curses into the gift that I'm asking for. That's not good spirited. And I think better of our Nornir than that. So the challenge is to see how runes that sometimes look negative apply in different situations with hopeful meanings or positive meanings. And there's a lot of that. So figuring out the runic lens, and it's all situational. It really depends on when you draw that, if you're using runes divinationally or to shed light on things. So another note on runes and the people jumping on, aha, it says songs, that can't be runes. There is a lot of people out there, and this is a trend that I think we would all be wise to shy away from. Some of us, in a broad sense, are in more need of this advice than others. People, I'm trying to think of the best way to express it, because there's a lot of different ways, and it's hard without citing lots of examples and taking us far afield. But there's a tendency to celebrate something that you find that is unique and different. So if everybody, has one take on it, you need your hot take on something that's different, that shakes up everybody's understanding. And that's really appealing when there's no consequence to what you do. Everybody does that. Like, history's been, done over and over and over again. We all know history. We all know these, great old white men of history. So I'm going to have a hot take. My new commie take on history is I'm going to find these little points of incongruence and come up with a ridiculous theory. Because I have a shred of implication, I'm going to override, tones and tones of stuff to the contrary. And I think sometimes people do that in their attempts to rediscover how our ancestors conceived of our faith in their time. Svan and I have talked on here fundamentally, the speaking into existence of something is perhaps the fundamental magical act. Runes are much more than straight line drawings that are carved on stuff. That is an expression of a rune in the physical. There's also intonation and galder of runes that is fundamental to it. And we see that. This is, in fact, a great example of it. It's funny the lengths that people will go to. So I caution people to avoid the tendency to find different and innovative ways to be contrary, instead of showing deference to folks that have spent a lot of time really studying the deep things on this, instead of finding surface things to say, aha, I found it. And it's really easy to do that. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, but sometimes in the reasoning of this, it's like there's a anti-Occam's razor proposition. Sometimes when there's something that is conventionally believed, it makes all the sense in the world. We reject it for the strange, extreme, doesn't really fit, ludicrous theory, because it's more fun to choose a different path than to digest age-old wisdom. And I think that we do good to be cautious against that. Svan, with that, will you move us into verse 153?
For an eighth I know, what to all is useful to learn, when hatred grows among the sons of men, that I can quickly assuage. Now that's interesting because, so I just read a Bellows translation, and here's a different translation, and it is also a Bellows. Though, an eighth I know, that is all to the greatest good to learn, when hatred grows among heroes' sons. I soon can set it aright. That is. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I actually was hitting the Thorpe translation on my multiples. Excuse me. Yes. But again, the sons of men versus the heroes, or among heroes' sons, I think that's very interesting. Sometimes it's translated as warriors' sons. This rune is correlated to Nauthiz. Nauthiz is the rune of constraint. Sometimes it is called the rune of toil, but oftentimes too it is the rune of binding, the rune of subduance. And we kind of see this in a positive sense. Since you spoke of this, this is a perfect example. Oftentimes Nauthiz is seen as a negative. Again, it's just a perception of. But in this case, we're talking about the subduing of emotions, the flaring of quarrelsome nature in the halls of warriors. And I think that's the significance of this, is because the reason why heroes' sons or warriors' sons is because this is culturally connected with the idea that bad things that happen in the halls can spill out into the land. If people have a grievance over certain things and they are in high station, this could cause skirmishes, wars, bloodshed. And that's why I think there's an emphasis there on heroes, sons, or the sons of warriors. And, it's, again, of the greatest good. Seeing that the folk must err towards maintaining peace in order to prosper is a high value. I was just again looking at some of the cross translations. Some of these are truly interesting, but this utilizing this rune, some people believe that the ability to encapsulate a runic power can be done through simply song. There is, not a symbol or a need to carve or to do these kind of elaborate steps, that there can be kind of, again, pulling or a manifestation of. I have seen and witnessed some strange things, perhaps even weird things, from my runic teacher, in which he kind of expounded on this and, did some things where the closest thing that I could see to like a Leo, in which it ended up causing someone to like leave the building. And whatever reasons it may be, it could have been a phone call that they had to leave, or I don't know, there's time for them to go, or they had an appointment at some point. Or I've tried to logically gather as to what exactly happened, but my teacher was saying that there are ways that you can kind of, again, manifest the power of the runes through long study and training, and to kind of become part of the weft and the weave of the world around you. And if you are in tuned enough, you can slightly affect things around you. And there was an odd person in this order that was kind of, I don't know, just acting strange and like following, or we kind of got a very, very strange feeling from this person. And he was basically like, I'm gonna tell them to leave. And he spoke something under his breath, and he made a symbol of the one of the runes, and I couldn't quite see it. And surely enough, about 10 seconds later, this person kind of stops what they're doing and immediately goes towards the front door. They didn't buy anything. They just almost, I can't explain it, just walk straight out the door. And I didn't see if he went to his car or whatever, but he never came back in. And I was just, my jaw like dropped. I was like, what did I just witness? It was amazing. So in lending to this, the understanding I think that he was trying to express to me is that the Leoth is, again, your ability to harmonize with the runes, to link yourself through meditative practice, through Galder practice, and through becoming very, very interconnected with your understanding of the runes, that you have somewhat of an ability to affect things around you. They're almost like a radius of effect in which you won't pull too much in other strands of fate. And that's when, large, the farther reach you have, the more catastrophic the movements can be. But in your around you can begin to change. I wish I could expound on that more, but that was about the only thing. But to be able to say that I've witnessed it is true. I've witnessed it. I don't know what to make of it still, but it was quite powerful.
Bought us 3 coffees. You kids know what that means. I don't know. All I know is it's like a $25 for VNS and $25 for the Njordshof Fund, and it's much appreciated. Ronald is a consistent giver and has really done a lot of good with his donations, and we appreciate it a lot. Thank you. So there's a lot of ways, and this kind of stems off of the commentary for the last spell, but so you can carve runes, you can Galder runes. Other people do runic yoga where they embody the shapes of runes in order to manifest things. Another thing that you can do, and one of the things that I love so much about our faith and our worldview, there's always many, many layers. One of the most basic but most effective is internalizing truths of the runes and implementing those in a practical sense in your life with things. I find it very apropos that this Nauthiz is the need rune. It is often seen as negative because it's like desperate need or a dire need for something. Oftentimes, folks have theorized that the symbology of it represents the need fire, which is the fire made by friction. But I can think of nothing that bonds contentious warriors together who want to fight amongst themselves than by them rallying to a common foe. And that's the thing that has always stood out to me most in this stanza and its association with Nauthiz, is by giving them a common thing to fight against, it bonds men, it bonds warriors, and always has. And we see that today from the playground all the way into adulthood and war and many things, shared need and shared strife brings people that would normally bicker amongst themselves together and unifies. And I think that's a really important truth of this stanza. Let's move on to the next one.
So 154. A ninth I know, if need there comes, to shelter my ship on the flood. The wind I calm upon the waves, and the sea I put to sleep. Couple of things about that one. When we talk about the sheltering my ship on the flood, it in essence is preparation, the removal of the main mast and brought down so that it doesn't catch wind or break the mast. A lot of times they would pull down the mainsail and create a shelter from the sail in order to keep the decks, especially if they had to hunker down and ride through a terrible storm. And so this is what is being spoken of. You can see in other translations where the word flood is replaced with waters. But the sheltering part is, I think, the part that throws some people off. The need of a shelter is how it's spoken of. And also to the bjarga, it's one of the Nordic words that we kind of get when we speak of the word barge, is again a reference to the ship. On the float is the way or the flood, but it's really again like a what would be a kenning for the ocean, the sea. So if you need to set your shelter in the sea, if you need to hunker down, I know a runic, or I know a power, I know a song that I can speak it out and that it will calm the waves. And again, this is kind of, I had made mention of like the runes are kind of like, I view them as a religion within a religion. I think there's again, a hot take, if you will, that some people are trying to take, in which they think because magic is not, the understanding of magic is not truly or fully clear when it comes to our ancestors' usage of magic. It's very scant. And a lot of people in the early times of runic magic were kind of pulling from other traditions or understandings, or trying to at least slightly fill in the gaps. And there's like a hot take now where it's like, no. Everything, to do with the runes is not really at all what it is, because it's been influenced by so-and-so or this way of thinking, and generally you'll hear the onus thrown upon like left-hand path hermetic magics. And I think that a lot of that has its influence for sure, but not enough to establish a point where it's like something you can level an accusation on. It's again, when we speak about the usage of the runes for divinatory practice, for carving, or for bringing into manifestation within ourselves or externally, you can, in essence, look at almost any Aryan branch of either religion or magic that has an equivalency. And so the that accusation, I think, has very little bearing. Some people speak of the idea of like, blessing or hallowing or doing anything in directions. And they're saying, the Hermetics do this, but it's like the Hermetics didn't make that up. And that's also seen in lore elsewhere where, Viking-esque Viking guy in the Eddas holds his horn up in directions, or we speak of the dwarves that hold the sky, and they are east, south, west, and north. there's an attempt to kind of block people or, again, dissolve things. And I think it's ultimately to then reset things in a new way in order to say, yeah, we came up with this. So you got to be weary of a lot of that. But I think that one thing that's truly interesting about this religion within our religion, about runes, runic ideals, runic philosophy, runic magic, is the concept of being able to change the world around you within the scope of your will. I think this is a very powerful tenet of our faith. We can see this when people talk about the king is the land. They'll accept that completely. The king is the land. In essence, his might is woven into the people and the land. Nobody would bat an eye. But the idea, again, of someone being able to manifest their will, their woad self, if you will, to such a level that they can affect the world around them, at least in a small amount. Again, because I'm a believer that, the more you pull of the structures and struts, you'll have effects elsewhere that you might not even realize. And in this case, I think that what we are talking about is that the usage of the building blocks and the manifestations of the universe to slightly waver things around us. And some people could say, no, I don't believe that, or I think that these are symbolic songs or what have you. Or, again, the one argument that I heard is, no, these are just actually the calendar runes for the runic calendar. And I'm not trying to downplay. It's just that you'll find people kind of either find arguments to logically explain things away.
Flag on the play. Svan is being too nice. I've got a bad cop flex.
Here we go.
No, there's a lot of people that have a lot of ideas that are just wrong. Yeah, these are absolutely magical spells. Like I said, stuff's multi-layered, but there are truths expressed in many ways. Our folk, in all branches, as Svan said, of our faith, have this interplay of magic in numerous forms, and it's very much it's an important part of our religious practice. The runes are absolutely religious, and they're a gift to us, a teaching to us by our gods. It's part of, and we'll get to this when we go through the Rikstula, but it's part of the ennoblement and the raising up of our folk. And you see the progression through time of, the very simple and the lower on the scale of development folks don't need or aren't ready to utilize the runes. But as our folk became more noble and advanced in their station, they were taught by Heimdallr the mysteries of these runes and the proper use of them and how to do them. It was one of the noble arts, along with, I think, horseback riding and warfare and numerous things that he taught to Jarl and Colin, I believe. It's absolutely essential. And Svan, you exalted priest of the Aesir. You get to speak with authority. You do not have to give way to any of the let me push my glasses up crowd. Please do not feel like you need to.
Well, one of the mysteries, I think, in relation to this is diffusement. If you place out before people multiple theories, ideas, you create a strata that they have to work through. And that, again, if it becomes something, oftentimes if you find someone who's looking into the runic studies and they settle on an idea immediately and then that's it, that's not the person that's going to get far. The person that's going to get far is the one that is consuming the ideas and going through that and then trying to pass through the threshold. So I think sometimes, like when a missile gets flak, when you have a missile going at something and then all of a sudden the flak comes out, the idea is to see through the flak, or to at least absorb it, and then continue through. So I think a lot of times what I am trying to do is lay down multiple pathways to kind of veer off those who might want to just settle on the logic. Those people don't need to know the mysteries if they're just willing to settle on it. And it is out there. And
So,
those that press and go deeper.
again, flag on the play. Their logic is not sound. You don't have to be some kind of wizard and put on your, funny hat or your Harry Potter outfit in order to grasp the logic that these things exist in other places. We have a tendency to do that with stuff. The whole, the Nazis did it. The Nazis did it on any possible thing. Nazis fed their babies breast milk, so we can't do that. So does any other mammal in the history of the world. They don't separate some of these things. Yes, hermetics do certain things. Some things are commonalities that different branches of humanity all do when they're doing things that have a certain amount of crossover. Certain things are fundamentally Aryan, but to deal with the directionality, sometimes different groups of people, some we like and some we don't like, do the same sorts of things for the exact same sorts of purpose. And logic factors those things in as opposed to jumps on one data point and uses it, as I said earlier, to play gotcha with. While we're here and while I stole the floor from you, we got a couple of people who have been generous that I'd like to acknowledge. First, Alcy Miller bought us 3 coffees. Nick says that equals $5 per coffee. And he says, Hail Odin. Thank you very much. We really appreciate it. Thank you. Also, Monk blew the victory horn, which I'm told is a $50 donation. That's awesome. Thank you, Monk. We really do appreciate it. Yeah, that means a lot. Thank you. So one of the things about this, again, there's a lot of deeper ways to take it, but I think that we need to not neglect the simple for the complex. All of them are relevant on the most basic level. The rune associated with this is Isa, the ice rune. Now, it's a rune about actual ice, but it's also a rune about stasis and stillness. And I think it's, again, extremely relevant to this particular stanza. And there's all kind of ways you can take it or whatever, and a lot of them are right, but many of them are wrong. But the sea going to sleep or going in a place of stillness and stasis is, when water does that, it's called ice. I suppose there's a lot of other things about calmness, but the most fundamental, it literally stops the water from doing water stuff. It stills things. It has a moment of stillness, of quiet, of reprieve, of contemplation. The Isa rune is one of being able to press pause on a lot of things. What I was going to say earlier, and I kind of spaced it on the last one, though when we say the word runes, we think of the stick drawings. The most powerful experiences I've ever had with runes have been Galder, have been intentional Galder towards a goal. So I think that's extremely, extremely relevant. And one of the runes that has been very beneficial to me in a lot of ways is this rune, Isa. The focusing of the intent on this rune, I have used a lot to still my mind, to bring myself back to center, to pause and bring everything down, take a breath, focus, collect myself, collect my thoughts, and then proceed towards something. And I found it extremely useful in my personal practice that way. So don't neglect the simple for the complex. There's certainly value to both. And I'm ready to proceed whenever you'd like to.
Okay. Again, 155. We move from Isa into the rune in a younger Futhark, and the reason why I'm bringing that up in relation to the Armanen is that they still follow the same. The Armanen and the younger Futhark follow the same up until the last two runes. So this rune is in the younger is called Aur, and linguistically, it can be seen that most people know it as the rune Yira. If you drop the J, the word for year in Old Norse was Aur. The J was dropped and it was emphasized at just the vowel sound. But in English, it stayed with year. So Yera or Aur are very much they are the same rune, but it's worth noting that again, a lot of Old Norse drops, and we see this happen in English a lot too, with especially with the letter H kind of being dropped off of words, and the vowel sound is kind of picked up and added as this emphasis, and this is one of those cases. So if you read the Younger Futhark and you see this as AR, and it's maybe missing some of the symbolage, it's worth noting that it is an A with a dash over it, which makes the owl sound. So it's hour, like hours, but it means the year. They just dropped the Y. And again, another point of this that I think is really worth looking at is we have these conceptions of the runes as being specific ways and entailing with specific ideas, but to see them in usage and to see them in how they affect the world, that can affect in a way, is outside of what we are kind of consistently told, and we really get them from a divinatory sense. People will say, like, this rune means this, because if you're trying to read in divination, but when you're manifesting its power, it gets interesting. And I think these are truly beautiful about the way that they open up and expand the horizons. Don't pigeonhole the rune. In this one in particular, a 10th I know, what time I see house riders flying on high, so can I work that wildly they go, showing their true shapes, hence to their homes. So this one's kind of a big one. First off, the word that is used in Old Norse that he translates to house riders will cause a lot of confusion. The word in Old Norse is tunriður, and tunriður means hedge or fence rider, not house. I could kind of see where he's getting the idea of the house, because a lot of the lore going into perhaps the night mare or the Nachtmara and the spirits of ill, sleep and home, and how they can kind of plague your home. But I really like the concept of what the actual translation is. Tunriður, I think, has significance. It means the illful or ill beings that can move between the barriers of things. They can go from outer guard to inner guard, and that's what truly makes them threatening. You'll often see it translated as night hag, as night witch. There's a lot of different translations, but there's never mentioned of that The word is tunrider. Now, the meaning behind it is, again, I think correct. The placement on the night hag or night witch is a fair assessment, especially when you look at the corpus of lore that the visage that is often associated with baleful spirits is that they are oftentimes called troll wives, wolf riding women, but they're often seen as like hags, or not even quite, almost like a mockery of femininity. They're not feminine, they're not motherly, they're not of the true shapes in which we look at women and think about them, and everything that they bring to society and bring to the home. In essence, they're kind of a mockery of it, and they take that shape, I almost in a sense, as to mock it, because the deep sense that we have, every person having a mother, every person having a connection to the feminine in relation to our society, and the primogen of a woman being a giving mother, a caring mother. That mockery just sends it even further down, into which they kind of, again, show themselves as being a dark reflection, an evil reflection of it. And you see people kind of glorify these translations and, try to point fingers saying, oh, it's a patriarchal society that paints these, they're women. No, they are not women. In actuality, they're a mockery of women. And that's why they're witch wives or troll wives. And that has power, especially to our ancestors then and to us now. Hexanacht is a perfect example of a holiday in which we have the women of our folk create charms and spell that bless the men. And generally, it came from when they were blessing the folk before they went out to pasture, or when they went out to do business or war. Right around in the springtime, they would go out, walk through sacred flames, so that when they went outside of the hedges, they would into the outer guard to herd the sheep, herd the cattle, or what have you. So the women and the feminine within would fight against the witchery, the kind of mockery on the outside. And so I really like the idea of the hedge rider, the thing that can come into the inner guard and is a mockery of everything in the inner guard. What makes the inner guard good, it hates, and it will, you ride a horse, it rides a wolf. You see a loving mother, then it turns into a hideous, like bag lady, if you will.
So speaking of, and takeaway, one might be a troll wife if they use terms like the patriarchy. Hate to read. So you find with a lot of our concepts, there's kind of a Leostav and Merkstav version. There's a righteously aligned version and a malignant version. And you see that with a lot of things, like Svan was pointing out, with, the Spaukona, or women that are useful and good and working in benefit of society, and with the troll wife, or these, spooky witches out there trying to cause, strife. You see a lot of these, again, a light side and a dark side version of certain concepts between order and chaos, right and wrong, good and evil. That said, I see a question over in the chat that I want to get to before we move forward, because I detect a little bit of an urgency in it. As John's a rune for redemption, or to get oneself right and back in the fight. What I would say as my initial response to that, and if I knew more on the side, or if you wanted to write an email, maybe I could have a little bit more to reflect on. But with what you've said, I would suggest either Raido, which is the rune of right action, the right sequence of events, getting rightly aligned with order, or Tiwaz, with that stable pillar of cosmic order, of right versus wrong, order versus chaos, stability and right alignment. I think both of those are good options. I think that if you're going sequentially, you might want to first utilize Isa as a stopping point, a pause. Let's stop the bad action. Let's reset. And then one of the other two, if not both of the other two that I mentioned. But that would be my advice. Svan, do you have impressions on that while we're on it?
Well, yeah, one, I would say, I think all of the runes that you spoke of would be very good. I think Sowilo or Sol, the Sieg rune, the victory rune. I think one of the other things too is that rune definitely brings about the purging of darkness. It brings about clarity in order to gain victory. Seldom or oftentimes the sun or the light will purge the snakes, and I think that can be taken externally or internally. And so a great rune to pull forth too. I mean, is the Sowilo rune. The idea of being able to kind of bring yourself back into the light and purging out some of the dark things that need to be removed within oneself, or finding a pathway to going over the hurdles that we often place in front of ourselves.
All right. Well, Svan, if you would be so kind. Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to bring a point too. One thing that we didn't talk about, or well, it just hit me, was again the rune Yira or Aur in relation to getting rid of or forcing the hedge riders to take their true shape. So one of the things that I think some people might not think about Yira, when they think about Yira, they think about cycles. They think about harvest. They think about good work, bearing forth great fruits, and so on and so forth, is that there is also an earth might to Yira. And there is also a sense of expediting or removing the illusion of something. The idea of, in essence, forcing the time of it to move forward so that it can only be its true self. It's kind of like forcing, if a muscle, it's forcing that muscle to strain harder so that it has to relax. In a way, this earth might that Yira or Aur is speaking of is that there is a kind of timeliness to grounding something that uses the ability to ride between the hedges. It's an ill spirit, and so forcing it to cycle itself through something that it thinks it has time on and has an ability to create cunningness and mockery and evil. And in an essence, you kind of mire it down and force it to have to take its true shape and flee home. Something interesting to think about in relation to, Yira or Aur having a lot to do with the season, the year, and time of the year, and of the earth and of the ground. So another kind of truly aspect of that rune. Okay, sorry. It's hopping back to check some of those comments because you brought up that question. Let's see. So we're on 156.
Yep.
Now, we move into Sig or Sol. It's oftentimes Sowilo in the Elder. An 11th I know, if needs I must lead to the fight, my long-loved friends. I sing in the shields, and in strength they go, whole to the field to fight, whole from the field of fight, and whole they come thence home. That's a super powerful, and I really love the way he writes it to kind of emphasize the point. It is this one is just really well constructed in the way that it's translated. But again, this is the rune that is spoken so that when going into battle, victory is attained. The victory of the fight, from the fight, and home to celebrate. This encompasses the Sig rune, the Soul rune, the Sowillo rune, the rune of victory. And I don't think it's just perfectly encapsulated right there in the verse.
This is the rune of the Baratus. The tradition of singing or intoning or battle cry beneath shields is an ancient one amongst our folk. It's commented on by Roman sources and others as, being a terrifying sight when the Germanic tribesmen would go out and chant their war cry beneath their shields. And I thought that was I also really love how this is written here. I think it's extremely powerful. I think it makes all the sense in the world. Sowillo rune is a victory rune, as Svan mentioned with his earlier advice. It is also light conquering dark. And the other thing is, it is ever victorious. Like it's the power of the sun, that solar might is unstoppable. And I think it's displayed here in a really, really kind of cool way. Hi, Obs. So another point that I just kind of want to make in the midst here, and it's not specific to this. I'm doing my show. You want to say hi to people? Okay. So what I wanted to say was there's a lot of naysayers to Meister von List or to his revelation about the Armen and runes or whatever that might be. But when you look at their correlation to this runic poem, and this is the first, instance that I'm aware of to where these runes were assigned to these songs, they fit far too good for there not to be truth there. They fit too beautifully and too perfectly to be random. And if you see, they're not randomized. They're in a very precise order, and there's some change here and there, like at the ending, but there's a clear intent and a clear divine guidance there. And so, whatever people's thoughts or feelings might be, some of these things are undeniable to the song in a very obvious way. And I would say that the deeper you look, the more they are, the more the ones that you don't understand will reveal deep meaning to you. And with that, I'm ready to go into the next one if you'd like.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a point too that the Armon and Futhark is crucial in the studies of the runes. It's another reason why there are some runes that you could say are in the Anglo or in the Younger, but they're also in the Armanen. But one clear addition to the folk Futhark that is undeniable that you can see is Gevu or Gebo, and it is the Gibo of the Armanen. It's it stands out. Obviously, Hail or Hagel, when we draw it on the folk futhark, is the X with the center axis as opposed to the kind of slanted H. But that is also the case, in the younger and so on. But it is the point of that the folk futhark was to get people to look into all the futharks and to go like, I've never seen a Gibo that way. Well, if you haven't, it means you haven't seen the Armanen, and you should go look that up. You should go check that out. So it is highly influential and worth, and I think that's why we're paying homage to each futhark, was with the intention of passing knowledge through paintings and writings and works of art, but also get people to kind of look into things.
A last thing that I'd like to mention before, and then we'll go into 157, but it's worth noting that the Armanen runes are what set this into motion that we're doing today in a lot of ways, what laid that foundation at a time when magical usage of runes was not in fashion and not well known and not well studied. Meister von Lys reawoken or caused runic knowledge to be reawoken, to guide our folk, and laying those foundations set a lot of very important things into motion that, in many ways brought us to where we are today. And there's a power in that as well. Svan, if you would read 157 for us, please.
157. A 12th I know, high on a tree, I see a hangman swing. So do I write and color the runes that forth he fares and he talks to me. Now, this is one of my favorite ones because of how cryptic and odd, I think it would be said. I have heard many theories on this about the idea of resurrection, or the idea of what would be necromancy, speaking to the dead. This one is one of those that really plucks the imagination if you're into some of these things. And I've seen people try to, speak ill of Lord Odin. Oh, you worship a god that does necromancy or what have you. And I really kind of laugh at the childness of a lot of that. But this, again, speaking on the embarking of or gaining wisdom through the books. Now, the word that's used is mailir, which is to converse or to speak with. And in it says mailir with me. They converse with me. And so that forth he fares most likely means that he can then again walk. Saugengur gummi or mailer vid me. So then again he can walk and speak with me. And that is where I think where the pointing at resurrection as opposed to necromancy. But either way, truly an interesting, point of the idea of being able to gain knowledge, vision, secrecy, or an understanding of something from someone who has passed the veil. And what I really think this is, if we break it down, is again attaining a part of the shape of the body that remains often after death. Not just the body, but the hama or the hammer. And so this again is kind of the rune of reading the hammer of someone, whether they are alive or dead. But again, interesting to contemplate on.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and got a question that is directly related, or a couple of them from Finn Wraith coming in, who I appreciate. He is up in the very, very early hours of the morning where he's at to participate.
Oh, yeah.
So, like I've said before, there are, good versions of things and there are malignant versions of things. Ghoulish, going around and like playing with dead bodies and zombies and Draugr and whatnot, is spooky and bad stuff. Whereas communing with the ancestors reanimating dead flesh is a very, very literal way of taking it. Not that that necessarily makes it wrong or bad, but we see that approaching and interacting beyond the veil in near-death experiences and shamanic journey. We see, an approaching of that in Odin's hanging himself from Yggdrasil to win the runes. We interact when we pray to our ancestors and to our heroes. And we also do that with the venerable practice of mound sitting, where you go and commune in burial places to commune with the honored dead and to gain wisdom from those who've passed beyond the veil. So to the question, excuse me, is necromancy bad or wrong for us like it is for Christians? No, not in that sense. And again, it depends. The how and the why you do stuff makes a lot of difference. It is some of the things fundamentally that make it wrong in Christianity is that you are to have no agency in and of yourself. All of the things need to be attributed and about the grace of their God, that none might boast. That's not relevant in our faith. We want people to be effective and to be capable and to be worthwhile. We want our gods to be proud of us and respect our ability and our capabilities and our accomplishments. So in that sense, it's not. And also it's, it's funny, in Christianity, it's literally built around a undead version of Jesus, where people go and like put their fingers in his ribs where he got stabbed with the spear and play with the holes in his wrists or his hands, depending on what version you read, where he was crucified. So playing around and reanimating dead bodies is, well in keeping with archaic Christian tradition. And then I guess the follow-up question also from Finn is do you think necromancy is something that we can actually do? In a sense of reanimating corpses, I hold my mind open that if you are a potent enough magician, there are any number of amazing and miraculous feats you might achieve. I would put, I think the odds of me witnessing that are extremely low, but I hesitate to say that any of these things are completely impossible. Some of that's, I feel that keeping your mind and your heart open to possibilities is very important. In the sense of communing with the dead and getting wisdom from them, I think it happens all of the time and is fundamental to our existence. I certainly think that in a sense of receiving messages in your dreams or through shamanic experience or through near-death experience or through death experiences. There's people who, due to medical situations or whatever, are clinically dead for a time and then return. But yeah, Swan, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, a couple things. One, the association of the rune in consideration to this translation is the rune Tyr. In the Armanan it is Tyr. And one of the ways and things that I have always taken this as that the rune Tyr allows you to see through and into the essence of or identify the nature of something despite its what it may appear as. So you see to the true nature. And that's why I kind of lent on the idea of seeing the hammer of a person, whether alive or dead, seeing which they came about, cutting through and reading them in that sense. Because again, Tyr is not often seen as something in a correlation to necromancy. And I think a lot of that is what we focus on. But I think what is really being talked about here is the ability to see into the nature of someone or something to its truest nature, that it speaks again, that it tells you as it is. Again, I was trying to think of just piggybacking on what you said. What's the quote? Anybody who discounts anything outside of their own experience is a sure mark of a fool. Those are wise words. I don't discount the ability, and I think that the viewing or understanding of these things is a little different than perhaps Semitic religions and their concepts. When we're talking about, even the concept of it in the medieval ages and what have you, necromancy, the idea of conjuring ghosts or conjuring spirits and speaking to them and gaining, I think this has a different sense. We're talking about the physical body. And so that lends me even more to the idea of being able to see through and into the history, story, and weird of all that is, so that they tell you again. I was just looking up very quickly the translation for a hanged man. So the word, the opi valva virgilna. Now, vir has to do with wire or rope. So I was quickly trying to look into the word gil, or sorry, it's gil now, virgil now. So, it's in 157 in the Old Norse, it says, that kan ek et torfta. I know a 12th. Ev ek se outre, if I see in a tree, opi valva virgil now. And that's where I was looking for the translation as to what that might be. Tree. Because again, the translations get very, very interesting. And I was zeroing in. I found, of course, vir to be wire or rope. And I was just about to hone in on gil now in order to find that. But the next svau ek rist is to carve or to cut. Og I runum fauk. If I see up in the tree, and I'm like I said, zeroing in on virgil now, but the idea of like a hanging, because I'm right off the top of my head, I can't think of what gil now is. That if I write the runes and color them or give them a splashing of color at Saukengurgumi, and I kind of covered that, he will walk again or speak with me. So the key in that, I think, is the Vergil now will give us a bit of an understanding towards it. And that's what I was looking at. But I have always taken this to talk about the true nature. I find the Tyr rune is the rune that cuts through all obfuscation or mystery, or perhaps, again, even the situation of death or life or silence or blindness. Tyr is the rune that allows you to see through all conditions towards the true nature of thing or the way something has happened. Oftentimes, I think that's why people overly emphasize the usage of the Tyr rune in relation to like judgments or legalities and things of that. But I don't think it's just that the need and wanting for clarity is there. But outside of that, there's more to it, the ability to cut through the layers or even death.
All right. Let's move to 158.
Okay. Let me see here. Just getting to one spot. Okay. A 13th I know. If a thane full young with water I sprinkle well, he shall not fall. Now he fares mid the host, nor sink beneath the swords. This is clearly a blessing for vitality and victory in battle. I think it's also a really great indication of our understanding of aspergements. I think oftentimes people will try to level the idea that we are copying Christianity. I think most people know that Christianity copies a lot, and so that it's reversed. But if we're talking about a glimpse into the insular sense of it, the sprinkling of water, the sprinkling of an aspergement as a blessing is not Christianity alone. That our ancestors have a long standing tradition of sprinkling water over babies and sprinkling water over warriors. So in this sense, the Thane, the warrior, even though he is young, and he says full young, he's speaking of an inexperienced warrior. A 13th, I know that if an inexperienced warrior goes, I will sprinkle him with water, and he shall not fall, even though he fares mid the host. Again, the host, the usage of the word is folk, but I think this is a kenning for battle, the throng of armies. And I mean, in the translation, he says that, han I folk komi is that he, even though he goes amongst the people, the reference that follows it about battle and sinking beneath, the swords going of battle is, I think, again, so the Thane going into the army or going into the host, as he says, in the battle, and taken, covered by the ways of battle is, again, a lending towards blessing by aspergement. And this rune, of course, is the Lagus, or excuse me, not Lagus, Berkano. Berkano. In the younger Futhark, it's Bjarkan, and in the Armanen, it's Barn, I believe.
I think it's just bar.
Bar. Sorry, I would say think Bairn as a baby. I know, but it's bar. And again, that this lends to this rune is often associated with protection. This rune is often associated with encapsulation, with again, just the blessing of being absolved of aggression, violence, or things towards you. It seems to have the ability to assuage that, almost to the point where you're not seen, or you can't be targeted, or you miss, or you become invisible. That power there ends up protecting you.
All right. Yeah, the important thing to note in the and you said this, but just to dial down in case anybody listening is not sure what we're referring to, the Christian baptismal rites that get kind of separated. There's the christening where you do a naming ritual and there's a sprinkling of water. That's very much a post-biblical practice, and it very much mimics our sprinkling of water to name a baby. There's kind of an overlap because there's at different times in European Christianity, the rite of baptism looks more or less like a sprinkling, opposed to a full immersion. But full immersion was how the original Christians did it. That's the way it's described in their Bible, is the complete submersion beneath the waves and being reborn into a life with Christ, or however they want to put it. So it's very much our practice, despite what anybody might say. Again, a lot of these things require looking a little bit deeper into. Next section is interesting, and I'm curious on some translation thoughts you might have on it. But if you could take us through 159.
A 14th I know, if fain I would name, to men the mighty gods. All know I well of the gods and elves. Few be the fools know this. Again, this is interesting. I'm reading the Old Norse now. Ausa og alva kan allra skil. Atlar. See, this is interesting because that doesn't translate like correctly, if you will.
It works. I mean, it is what's been agreed upon by.
Yeah.
So guys don't know, and this is specifically, and I'll send the link here to Nick, and he can send it in the chat. But there's a webpage that does. It's got 7 translations of the Havamal all together on each of these verses with the original Norse, which is pretty cool. And you can really pick up on some of the points of commonality on that. And, all 7 translated, fundamentally very much the same.
And the word, speaking of songs, it says that if I have to speak of or say the litany of, or the song of the gods and the elves, I can say it. Few have that ability. So this in relation to, of course, the rune is man. Or no, is it Lauf?
Love.
Okay. Yes, and Lagus in or Lor in the younger Futhark. Lor in relation, when we speak of this, like it says here that the lidi, the telling, if I must tell the litany and the power, or the speak of the gods and the elves, I can, and few know how to. The wisdom, I think this is absolutely kind of delving into the power of Logr in relation to the wells, the delving deep into the lore of something, or knowing the history and the reason why the mead of poetry is mead, the reason why Mimir's well is a wellspring, Earth's well is a wellspring, and Verjelmer is a wellspring, is because of the depth and the scope in which the liquid is kind of symbolic to. And so in this case, we're speaking of the ability or knowing or being able to recall or being able to look into and see deeply into the entirety and the lore of the gods, the entirety and the lore of the Alva or Alfar or the elves. It's that tapping into the ancient and the far back. And you can see this because a lot of people kind of correlate Lagus in a modern sense towards the unconscious or the subconscious, perhaps even to the folk conscious or the Jungian, kind of shared consciousness. And I think that still stands. It's the idea of being able to kind of delve back deep into that water, or go deeper into the dark waters of kind of again an ancestral memory, an ancestral blood, the wellspring of knowledge that is always kind of seen in relation to water. And so knowing deep, knowing far on the scope and understanding, or seeing deep into the horn, or seeing deep into the waters of the well, all correlate to being able to go back and go deep into and understand the missing or the great lore of the gods and of the elves. And few people have that skill. And again, I would say that this rune is the key component to going back on those pathways. This is definitely a meditative rune. And a lot of people don't always associate it strictly with that. They have a hard time. Sometimes they'll denote it as travel by water, some means. But I think ultimately this is the blood, the water of the self, and that this rune is the rune that calls one to look back into the depths of their understanding of the gods, their understanding of the elves, and the understanding of just our lore as it does come from. And worth considering too, Kvasir is made of the liquid of the gods. He's made from the spittle creates Kvasir, and Kvasir is the first storyteller who holds all that lore. Again, another liquid kind of reference, because the usage of fluid in relation to us transferring knowledge, whether it's the skein of water, the skein of the well, the skein of the wave, or the loading of the goblet, or loading of the horn, or loading of the bowl, is always done through liquid.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything Svan just said, I agree 110%. And I think kind of an interesting anecdote, and it was advice given to someone. There was a phase back in the early days of Asatru where we had a lot of people being pretendians. We had a lot of people, and this may not make sense to our international audience, but here in the United States, we had a lot of people that rejected Christianity and wanted to find something, I don't know, something more authentic. The only context they initially felt to do that was to try to either full on pretend they were Native American by some, imagined Cherokee princess ancestor, or try to be somehow co-opted into that by attending Native American ceremonies. And quite a bit of authentic Native American ceremonies are folkish. They are just for folks of their tribe, or certainly of their nation of people. And the advice given to this guy when he wanted to go for the showy tourist part, but then he wanted to stay for the serious religious part. And one of the Native American gentlemen leading things, he told them, he said, "No, you must drink from your own well." And I think that was sound advice, and it was interesting that it came with that same imagery.
Sorry, it's just the voice.
Was that not how it occurred? I have to imagine it was. But yeah. So that said, let's proceed to 160.
So 160 is interesting, again, because of a translational point and our loss of some of the story. There's another interesting part in here that I was, perhaps it's a spelling error, but I'll go into that. So 160, a 15th I know, that before the doors of Delling sang Thjodrorir, the dwarf. Might he sang for the gods and glory of the elves and wisdom of Hroptatirs, wise. So right out the gate, one of the things that's worth noting is that the story that is being referenced here is lost. We don't have any cross literature written down that could pinpoint Thjodrorir's song to Dellingur. But it is worth noting, Dellingur is, again, one of the heavenly wardens, the gods. He is kind of a keeper of the skein in between the mid and the above. And we speak often of Dellingur's gates, especially around this time of year, in relation to Ostara. I know that a lot of folks don't. I even saw a conversation about where they were trying to link Ostara to Freya, or kind of pigeonholing the gods into ways that make sense for them without ever considering the gods themselves. But in Asatru Folk Assembly, we honor Ostara as Ostara, and we honor Freya or any other goddess that somebody might try to jam her into. I know some other people were trying to say that the goddess Not or Night is Ostara of the English. But instead, what we have done is simply taken her understanding as an Aryan goddess in all Aryan branches, and just given her that, place name in Anglo-Saxon, sometimes using Old Norse for the sounding of the name, to the east. But the gates are the gates of the sky, in particular, the Eastern Gate. The gates are referenced about the idea that light and warmth and the skein of the sun comes through the Eastern Gate of Dellingur's Hall. And that is worth noting and looking into, and why in the hierarchy of the gods, he is placed as one of the wardens. And so this story talks about a dwarf going to the Eastern Gate, or the rising sun, I think is what this is really alluding to. Going to the Eastern Gate, going to the place in which the sun rises. And what does the sun do to Dvergar in all of our lore? Is that they turn them to stone. So, and it's also worth noting the name of this this dwarf is Thjodrorir, and this is a play or a combo word that means people or tribe or group, and Odrorir is inspirer. So this is a name certainly for a poet or a skald or a singer of songs. And I think that this is alluding to a story that we've lost, in which a dwarf, knowing and having this great power, sings to the east, sings to the light, and either perhaps staves off the curse of being turned to stone, or despite being turned to stone, sings the songs. And we don't know. If anybody ever has any sort of stuff, I would love to look at it because I've looked. But there's another part of here too, where in the translations it says Hikyu Hroftauti in Old Norse, but it's translated as Hroptatir. And I've never noticed this spelling Hroftauti, Tati. And now I'm beginning to wonder if there's a misspelling based on the website, the translational misspelling, because it's not Hraptatir. And Hraptatir is Lord Odin. But Hroftauti is either a misspelling or a different word. And I think that's very interesting that I would like to look up. But I have a tendency to go that. And if it is a misspelling, perhaps on that website's part, that would make perfect sense. It is an established Haiti of Lord Odin that's used in other poems. So I think that's truly interesting. I was just looking it up as we were shifting to this verse. So the association that the of the rune with this, and again, I think it's truly interesting, is the rune Mon. Now, in the younger Futhark, it is Mother. And what the rune practitioners of the age did is they took the double-legged runes out. And there are rune stones that show both elder and younger at the same time. They may have done this for ease. They may have done this because they felt that the symbol better fit a human, a man. The symbol is the life rune, or the just a straight vertical axis with two lifting arms. But I, again, find it interesting. The word Theoth, people or tribe or folk, it's another word to be used that's often kind of synonymous with those things. So the mystery of it being the dwarf, I don't know, because the word is clearly there. Dverker. Dverker is a dwarf, or a svart alvar, a swarty elf. And I don't know, I wonder, and it kills me that the story of this, but again, the lore and the understanding of the songs, the ability for the rune to manifest your ability to recite, or your ability to hold. It's not just the understanding of the runes like in the verse before, where you go back and you can kind of encapsulate and gain and absorb, but now is to speak to the sun, speak to the eastern rising gates, the story. And I think it's, again, emphasis is that you're despite or in lieu of being turned to stone. And I think that this is the rune about being able to speak and know the lore and stand and make decree before odds that are often against us, in order to build that notoriety, that build that power, is, again, the ability to speak it, to inspire the people. But this one is very, very, very mysterious in its structure.
The only thing I really have to add is that this has always been a rune, certainly in modern Asatru, of worship. It has been a rune of reaching out, arms stretched towards the divine, reaching out towards the gods. It's been the traditional stance of worship in modern Asatru. People talk about, the Algi's pose. It's also very specifically the stance one takes when you do any kind of greeting of the dawn. When you face Dellinger's Gate and welcome the dawn, you stand in this algae's posture. And I think that's I don't know, I think that's a special point of connection. That we flip the page, we go to 161, and the end of this study is in sight.
Yeah, and I was gonna just briefly mention what you just said too. Is I think that wasn't lost on our the audience that was being spoken to of the poem is again that symbol, that positioning of this inspirer of the people, this Dvergar, which really kind of sticks out as being a little odd, but standing in the algaes, facing the eastern sun. And I've always wanted to find and know, did he get turned to stone? Like, I've always wanted to know that. But again, yes, the ability to speak and manifest and face against odds, in essence, speak the truth and know the truth and praise the gods despite the adversity or the inevitable. And it either shows your worth or perhaps averts you from turning to stone. I don't know. It's something I've always wanted to know.
All right.
161. A 16th I know, if I seek delight to win from a maiden wise, the mind I turn of the white-armed maiden, and thus change all her thoughts. Again, in correlation to the Armanen or the younger, because this is the last rune of the younger Futhark. This is, of course, Gibor. Or no, excuse me. Are we on? I'm sorry, I got my numbers mixed up. Yes, this would be Ir. Correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes, Ir. Okay, so then this is the same in the younger Futhark. The word U or U tree, again, the emphasis of the EU like sound. Also in Anglo-Saxon, it was EO. And then in the younger Futhark is Ir, this kind of double E sound, and emphasized in the Armanen as ear. Ear, double E sound, meaning the U tree. Now, I find this terribly interesting where I've always kind of pondered this and don't have the full conclusion or understanding of this relation to love and of again a kind of turning and making of in relation to the rune Ir, because the rune Ir in the younger Futhark has a kind of a much more actually, this is interesting. Perhaps it's talking about focus, because the rune in the younger Futhark has a lot to do with attainment and making the mark. Perhaps this is about controlling focus. Whereas a lot of times the Ir rune is brought about with the idea of one's own focus and ability to attain. This is, in another sense, changing the focus of someone else, controlling it, if you will, bringing you into the center, 007 scope sight, if you will, with a desired effect. The desired effect is to be seen. So the focus of oneself and the focus of others, and the ability to be able to control it and then make oneself the target, if you will, is interesting. I'm looking at some of this translation here. Ik wil in Svinemans Hava. See, and then get out or gaman, the joy of, which is not mentioned in the Bellows translation.
I think there's something to this as well. With travel up and down the axis, as it were. Up and down isn't necessarily good or bad as long as it's right ordered. But and this may be, I don't know, I hope this makes sense the way that I'm putting it. The idea of this iconographically is with the idea of death and reaching down, whereas the other one is the life rune and reaching upwards towards the divine or towards the astral, towards the higher self, the higher consciousness. This rune, I don't think this rune is primarily about love. I think this rune is primarily about sex. That being said, the idea of delving down into the chthonic or the more primal centers makes sense. The idea of reaching down into the roots, if you follow chakras and things that way, the lower cauldrons is where that sexual reproductive energy comes from and is housed. And I also think, when you look at just, and this may be a coincidence, but it comes to mind, is that death was archaically often kind of a kinning for orgasmic release. And I think that's relevant to this rune as it relates to this passage, certainly.
I was just double checking some things. One interesting thing I just realized was the elk sedge or the algae in the Anglo-Saxon and Elder Futhark is, of course, with the Z ending, which was very prominent in the early foundations of Germanic, and that this one, even though it's ear, the R was the emphasis. So this is an ending rune. So like, if it was like Heimir, this rune would be used to emphasize the R and not the Rov rune in Old Norse, or in But I was attempting to find that correlation, but it eludes me, perhaps for good reason. I did. This another interesting point of this verse: Fit armi kone. Fit armi is white armed. It's linked. It's white and arm. It's clear as day. Fit armi, white armed woman. I think we've talked about that before, about the beauty standards that were placed upon men and women in our elder times, and what was seen as attractive. And one of those was the white-armed woman, the gleaming. It's even mentioned in Frey's story to Gerda that her arms shine bright, and this is again the sulliness of the darkness of a person who's out in the sun all the time versus someone who has this fair and soft and creamy and was seen as just an absolute beauty trait that our ancestors throw out quite often. So I find that very, very interesting and pretty cool. Again, I would like to go more into thinking about this as far as the focus of an attainment of or converting someone's focus, making yourself the target, if you will, and thus changing all her thoughts to you. In 162, we have a mentioning back to Lord Fafnir. So this is where it's funny because it's not the end and it's not like a capstone on the other side, or but it kind of slaps you back into the overall mode of what's going on. 162 is a 17th I know. So that seldom shall go, a maiden young for me. Long these songs thou shalt, Lord Fafnir, seek in vain to sing. Yet good it were if thou mightest get them. Well, if thou wouldst learn them. Help if thou hast them. So this is kind of an interesting one because it's not quite stating the power. It's stating the desire or understanding of the power. It's stating the usage of the power, but it's not quite stating the power. And I've always found that to be frustrating. A 17th, I know that seldom shall go, a maiden young for me. Long these songs thou shalt, Lord Fafnir, and then it speaks again. So the translations in Old Norse don't quite help. And I've always taken this is in relation to the rune. So the rune, the placement of this, the rune in Armanen is the same as the Aur rune in the younger Futhark. The kind of a reverse or mirrored Nauthies, though there are also the one-legged symbol that's used in the Armanen. But looking at this rune, this is because it kind of conflicts with others. When we start to look at, say, the younger Futhark, and we look at the rune Aur, again, it has reference to the year and planting. If you look at the runic calendar runes, the 17th rune is the Lagus and Aur, and it is called Orla or Aurla, the water of the year or water of the dawn, whichever way you might look at it. But it's interesting that both the runic calendar and the Armanen and the younger Futhark have correlations in these runes, even though we're now past the 16 mark on the younger Futhark. It doesn't speak of the power itself, other than of a young maiden. And I was looking at some of the notes that people had placed on this. Long these songs thou shalt, Lord Fafnir, seek in vain to sing. Yet good it were if thou mightest get them. People are speaking of that the lines are lost. People have added them. I don't know if this is based on speculation, but I'll fill in the blanks based off of what somebody else has added in. But according to she hardly will leave me for another man's love. In this lore, Lord Fafnir, be unversed forever, or yea, thy wheel wear it, and with wisdom thine, 'tis helpful if heeded, 'tis needful if known. And this is, let me see real quick. This translation is Hollander. So Hollander places in the lines, but Bellows and Thorpe have the lines removed. And I just wanted to see briefly the cliff notes on one of these that I was looking at. Some editors have combined these two lines with stanza 163. Others have assumed that the gap follows the half line, making it so that from me, the end of the stanza. And again, interpolation. This stanza is almost certainly an interpolation and seems to have been introduced after the list of charms and that of Lodfafnir's Mall were combined to make the single poem, and that in essence was added to encapsulate all of them. For there is no other apparent excuse for the reference to Lodfafnir at this point during the poem. I find that, let me see, really interesting. So, if we're looking at this, I think the biggest point to understand is if they're talking about interpolation, I mean, it was written, but it seems to have been, again, brought in to encapsulate and connect the poems. And I wonder if the usage of the part where it says, long these songs thou shalt Lodfafnir seek in vain to sing, yet good it were. I wonder if the usage of the word Lyoda, the song, is the reason why it was brought down here. But then if we add the missing marks of what they are, let me see, I'm trying to scan everything that I'm going through here. Then we speak of, I'm trying to find the source of the 17th. I know if a slender maid's love I have and hold to her, thus I sing to her, and that she hardly will leave me for another man's love. This again correlates to the rune in the Armanen as holding fast in steadfastness to love. Let me see one thing. I just now realized too, because we don't have the Disney versions of ourselves anymore, that I am holding the fort alone, and I am all over the place. So I can't read your chats if you're chatting right now or asking me questions. And I will get to that in just 1 second. I'm pulling up something I just didn't even think I would need, but perhaps that's not the case. Okay. Of course. Here we go. Let's see. Do you, Azir, do you have the, Armanen?
Yeah, what's up?
For the rune, Again, he takes the sound from the Elder Futhark. He takes the from Ehwos, the again, it's the horse rune. Ehwaz, Ehwos, or Equos is what it was eventually turned to in the Latin language, is the rune of the horse. And he uses the symbol Aur from the younger Futhark, being slightly different than the Aur that he has later on in the Futhark. And I am focusing more on, again, the horse and the rider and the idea of the loyalty to beings. And again, kind of the usage of this one especially in relation to the poem and the verse, is that it's being said that you will turn the mind of the woman to me and could never be taken from me to someone else. And I'm wondering if this is, of course, in correlation with the idea of the unification. Seeing this comparison was often used a lot. If a man was to ride a horse, or if a woman was to ride a horse, there is a union between them that involved this kind of bond or teamwork between them. And so a lot of times, in comparison to romance and love and a strong relationship, there's always this kind of paralleling to it. Your relationship is like a horse and a rider, or a rider upon a horse, is that usage of the ability to be able to communicate and guide each other and help each other was seen as a positive thing in relation to relationships. So looking at this rune and seeing the sound, and then of course the rune in the runetal of the Havamal, I'm seeing this about as a rune of jointness or connectiveness, and its usage. I don't know if you have another take in this with the Armanen.
So, okay, so trying to think of the way to put this, and I think this comes in some interpretations of. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was gonna. Yeah, a pair is bound in primal law.
Yeah. So.
And the duality of the horse, even.
So I think that Svan is absolutely correct, but I think that there is. I think that okay, so I think that there is a, some additional meaning there. Whereas we see in perhaps the next one a little bit different iconographically. Absolutely, there is a profound relationship between horse and rider, and a partnership in many ways. There's another layer to it as well, and that's bringing the woman that is wild and untamed, taming her to your will, and forging a successful relationship with where she will follow where you lead and go with you. And so I just think there's a bit more to it than just some kind of an equal partnership like you may have with a warrior friend of yours. This is also about magically bringing a woman under your persuasion to because I'm hemming and hawing not to be PC, but because I don't want to give the wrong implication to the term, but to bring a woman under your guidance and under your reins, if you will, towards things. And I think that the unity of horse and rider is really interestingly seen in a marriage or relationship where things are ordered in a natural way, and a man is ahead of his house when things function that way. Whereas when you see competition, and you see like the 90s sitcom family where the mom is disparaging of the dad, and there's like a competition and an obnoxiousness back and forth, there's dysfunction there, and that's not the ideal of the rider on the horse. The rider on the horse goes with, there's trust there, and I think that's maybe one of the biggest things. It's bringing when you refer to the horse and rider in terms of a relationship in a cosmic order way, the idea is very much the trustful following of the lead of the man in that way when it's structured appropriately. And so I think that's kind of a fundamental about this, because remember, the person singing these songs is trying to work their will. So it's about them implementing will onto situation very often.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting. I know that when we talk about the concept of the horse and rider as a beautiful relationship that is seen, I think it's also worth noting. I think our ancestors saw the woman, especially the unmarried woman, as her social strata is not locked down.
Mm-hmm.
She was able to move about. She had protection from her father. She had protection from her brothers. So if you messed with her in certain ways, you could have, face consequence. So there was a kind of wildness to her in the social strata of our ancestors, in the way that they saw her. And the idea then of finding a woman and having her come into your home, and she's bound by oath in the sense that she gives her oath to you, she gives her oath to the household, and then she gains a different strata, but then it involves no longer just the kind of wildness of the man and the woman and their kind of place in society, whether he's the young warrior, he doesn't own any lands, he's kind of making his world. The woman is not fully tied down and still has kind of the sheltering of perhaps the tribe or the family or what have you, and they're just kind of moving about. And the idea of comparing that to going out and finding the wild horse and taming that wild horse, and then you two becoming and leading with a willful sense. I mean, this is pretty clear in our way of thinking, and it's spoken over about that teamwork, and like looking at the willfulness of and manifestation of the man being the kind of attainer of the mead, the one who goes in and takes this kind of vital power, consuming it, and then producing it into a willful sense. That shocks people, because we generally think in our culture and community of women as in the motherly sense, but we're talking about kind of before that, where there is this kind of wildness and ability. And I think when we think about it, it doesn't seem too strange, when we look at ourselves and we look at our social groups and we look at how we meet each other and how we kind of the playfulness, the back and forth, the flirting, the talking, the moving, the seeing each other, the dating. And then finally it kind of coalesces to this moment where there's oaths that are exchanged. And what we end up seeing is both the young man and the young woman changing their mode. And that's when, the father needs to be a person of willful forward, the one who provides, the one who guides, the one who brings, the good of the food and the water to the family. And the family could be the horse too.
Well, I was going to say, fundamentally, we talk about attainment of ascension for men and women, and kind of the breakdown is that man attains ascension through mastery, and women attain ascension through devotion. Like the full expression of himself is when a man has mastery over himself, over his situation, over the world that he's in charge of, that he can shape it the way it ought to be, that he can make things right, that he can direct things in the right way, but also that women are in a spot where they can fully give of themselves, fully devote themselves to husband, to family, to children, to whatever she is devoting and giving that love to. And one of the key things I think that's brought in with the horse analogy is that implicit trust. People talk about the connection between horse and rider in an like an intuitive, empathetic knowing. When that relationship is completely in tune, very subtle shifts or cues or things from the rider, immediately the horse understands and knows what to do. There's a there's a fully integrated unity of things there that you see that are personified by the horsemanship culture that was, fundamentally Aryan. The idea of domesticating the horse is one of the hallmarks of our people. And we see that with nobility itself arising from the mounted warrior or the horseman, through up until relatively recent times. So I think that's an important aspect of this rune that honestly, until now, I hadn't focused a lot of my attention towards. Um, so with that, Svan, will you take us through the final rune song? And the end is looking closer, but no one can say that we did not take our time.
Well, this is again another interesting one that brings a lot of questions, and I think that we can clarify this. An 18th I know that never will I tell, to maiden or wife of man. The best is what none but the one self doth know. So comes the end of the songs, save only to her who else my sister is. So the life-giving rune, as this one is associated with Gibor in the Armanen, and again I was kind of laughing about my connection with and Equas, because again my knowledge of the Armanen is very limited. I can't just bring up or recall the meanings of the rune poems like I can with like the younger Futhark. So that connection, like I was kind of like, oh, I hit it. I got it. But Gibor, again, connect in the Armanen is speaking, of course, of union and or the springing of life. But I find it interesting the way it's worded. So we have to kind of correlate. In the younger Futhark, there is no Gibo rune. It was one of the double-legged
untamed, wild single woman into a trusting, loving relationship where that's ordered. And now the result. What? Okay. All right. I'm not sure where that left off, but the other two runes kind of feed into that. Once that's established, the sharing of the being able to be in such a trusting spot to where you can have the the sharing of ideals, thoughts, and expressions to where the two are one unit. And it's one of those things that you don't want to trust. We've talked about all of the different scandalous women throughout the Hávamál and different things, and there's that, and you don't want to open yourself up to potentially being hurt and various other things. Finally being in that spot where you can have the female perspective, where the masculine and the feminine can factor into decisions and things in life, and you have all of that working in conjunction, that's kind of the closing mystery of this. And that's, you can have that platonically through your sister who has no ulterior motive, who is completely, you guys are unified, or with, with your in the best of circumstances with your spouse, with your soulmate. And I think that's a really important point of that unity, and it's personified beautifully in the Gibo rune, or here as it's displayed in Gibor with the almost swastika element to it, or the two hooks, because it's balanced out. Our video is still froze on my end, so I'm not sure what people are getting or what people aren't. I hope they are. Okay, so Svan, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right, excellent. We're almost to the finish line on this one. Can you take us through the closing stanza?
Yes, let's see here. So 164. Now are hoarse words spoken in the hall, kind for the kindred of men, cursed for the kindred of giants. Hail to the speaker, and to him who learns. Profit be his who has them. Hail to them who hearken. So, in the Norse, Old Norse, it's Halva. Halva, of course, is Lord Odin. It means, the high one. It's where the word, or where the titling Hávamál comes from. He translates it as horrors, Hor, and it, again, having relation to the word Haur, like in Hávamál, the wise and the high. So there's a lot of crossing there, but now have I spoken from the high one, and said in the hall, and then Althorf versus Othorf, the tribe, or the people of, it's it is is the goodness of, and the ill, or the balefulness of. So it's the goodness of That's interesting, actually, now that I'm looking at it. Ita sonam, and then baleful of Jotna sonam. So Jotna, of course, being Jotnar, the giants, but Ita in relation to man. That's very interesting. I'm gonna look that up in a second. But hail Sao, or to hail to the hail to the speaker, or the learner. But there's also an interesting part here. So the word hail, I see a lot of people throwing out the word hailsa when they say hello, and I don't know if they know that, but I've seen it enough to where I'm like, it's kind of it's not a correct usage of the word. The word hail is the more correct usage. Saying hail is, saying hello. Hailsa and heilir have different meanings, or change the meaning of the word in the way you're using it. And I've seen it enough now where I guess it's worth commenting on. But I find it truly interesting, the goodness amongst the sons of men, but the balefulness amongst the Jotnar. Cursed for the kindred of giants. I mean, it's clearly an ending point, and it's speaking, of course, that the wisdom that is learned by both the culmination of these poems is what we're looking at now. Where this exactly, again, throwing in with, was this originally placed after the end of Lodfafner's? Was this added in order to encapsulate what was most likely 3 separate poems? It's not fully known. I believe that this was kind of added as an end cap in order to fit the poems as they were, thus making them complete, and in a way, from that moment on, kind of like being spoken as a state or a spell over it. Is like, from this point on, poems are now one. And it, if you are wise to hear them, you will grow in great luck amongst men, and it will be a curse against the Jotnar. And I often associate that. I've been talking a lot about the Jotnar over the weekend, about the dissipation of the Jotnar, and how man, by extension of the gods, is or should be a decreer of order, a creator of order, a creator of society, a creator of organization, and that those that are dissipate. So the wisdom that we learn here helps us grow and order and create and focus and willfully build. And if you follow it, then woe is to the ones who seek to dis the Jotnar.
Yeah, no, I think this is, I don't know. I really like the way this is concluded. I've always found that to be special. I think it's poetic. I think it's exactly what you said. It is that bookend placed on it to make it complete and stand alone.
I was looking about hail and its different usages, because I really do see hailsa written a lot, and I don't think that's the correct usage.
No, it's not. It's not at all. And that's
where did that come from?
That's 1980s not understanding how to understand a different language. And it has become, so I don't mean any stink on it, because there's really not. It's always well intended, and it's a thing that's taken on a life of its own. But yeah, that is a very, very common thing amongst prison Asatru and guys that learn Asatru in prison, because a lot of their stuff and a lot of their material is older and passed down from different people at different points. And this is very much a reflection of 1980s Asatru that has, I don't know, that has lingered in certain circles. And it's one of those things, nobody ever wants to embarrass anybody and say, like, you know, what you really meant to say was, and nobody wants to really do that. So they typically don't.
I got a little bit, and maybe this could, because first off, and I think what you just said is really important. We're not doing a will actually, but I think it's good to discuss. So I'm looking up some of the stuff here, and I think the common thing is that perhaps maybe the well actuallys were coming up with, well, no, that means to say hail to someone, like a third person, which is sort of correct, but it also has another meaning, which means good health. So perhaps, you know, health and restoration or salvation to one.
No, that's what hail in and of itself means, though.
Yeah, I think it's redundant because hail means wholeness and wellness.
Yeah, the declination of it is at issue here. And that being said, like, I get that. Again, I'm genuinely not trying to, you know, be disrespectful or anything. It's an important, I'm currently, you know, struggling my way through trying to learn Icelandic with Old Norse vocabulary. Like, and that said, complete disclosure, I've tried this numerous times in my life and I find it really, really difficult. So, you know, this is something that I think we're all working on and trying to get figured out. And at different points, the idea is once we realize something's incorrect or not quite correct, we move on to something else. I think you addressed it, but I see it in the chat, another question about the translation, whore's words as opposed to har's words. I think that's different ways to, I don't, Svan, what do you call that letter in Icelandic?
It's the owl.
The owl. The
owl is the
A with the dash over top of it doesn't make an A sound and it doesn't make an O sound. But you see runically and linguistically an overlap between the A and the O, especially when you go into like the Anglo-Saxon.
Yeah.
So it's just a different way to anglicize Hauer, because it's not, his name's not Har either. It's not the sayings of Har, though many of us have heard it that way. It's very much the sayings of Hauer. And, you know, when you anglicize, there's not like a codex on how to do it. You just, you know, go with the next closest thing. And it's kind of halfway in between. Most people, you're absolutely correct in the way that we're all very familiar with seeing it, is the A with the dash over it. And we see that next to it in the original translation. That's one of the reasons I like the version that we're using, because you can see them both together. And the way it declinates, if I'm using declinate correctly, is interesting. The title of this piece is in this last section, which I find important too. And it literally is separated into two words, Hávamál. You know, Háva being the declination of Hauer in this sense, in this tense, I guess, and Mál speaking. So, yeah, there's not a lot of, there's nothing fancy to it. And to follow up on the question, you know, he says Hauer might be pronounced whore. No, it's pronounced Hauer, but I don't see anybody using it. It's interesting. Your thing at the bottom phonetically sounds like it makes so much more sense to me, and I'm not sure why people didn't do that, because that phonetically would read correctly. But, you know, they're doing letter for letter, and is it an A or is it an O? It's neither, and you pick your best one because we don't have that letter in our alphabet.
And I think he's pulling from the Hávamál, the high one. I think there's something there because it clearly in Old Norse is Hava. And so I don't know if he's trying to create some sort of continuity with other Haiti and stories in that, that he's translating. But in the Old Norse, it clearly says it's Hava's Maul, and Hauer and Hauva kind of have the high one. It is, I just realized looking at it too, Helsa is the verb of saying hello. If you describe someone else saying hello to someone.
It means to hail.
Right. Whereas the word hail son is a salutation. So you could say hail or hail son, or what was the other one? Hail samliger, if you really want to go the extra mile. But hail works. Heill, hail. Hail son does work, but you got to add the N on there. Otherwise, you're speaking about someone saying hello to someone else.
So just a note on it, if you guys speak linguistics, and I don't, and I'm always confused by it. Sorry, and the quick thing, it 1 second. So anyways, Wikipedia, the Wicca etymology section talks about this, and I think it's interesting. The Old Norse name Hávamál is a compound of the genitive form of Hávi, which is the inflectionally weak form of Odin's name Haur, or High One. So I am still figuring out exactly what genitive means in stuff, and when one would use an inflectionally weak form, again, these are words that are beyond my current understanding, but I am working on them, and that's what it says to any of you who are skilled in linguistics.
Well, and that's one of the things that really it's just right outside of my grasp. I understand nominative, genitive, dative, and accusative, or possession basically. But
because you are a native son of Iceland.
But then when we get into the feminine and feminine usage in relation to why it's being used that way is always something I end up kind of getting lost on, and I'm still working through that too. So anybody that's thinking that I'm some sort of linguistic wizard is not correct.
Well, sort of, but you are. Your native tongue is Íslensku, so
yeah.
that puts you ahead of a great many of us who English just doesn't have those pieces to it. But yeah, that's linguistics are fascinating, and it's something that I'm absolutely working on. So I think we're all at different points in our study on some of these things. So thank you guys for us. I didn't realize at the start was going to be a 7-part episode. Glad that it was. I'm glad we took our time on it. I'm very satisfied with it, but I do know it was long, and I appreciate it. Got a few questions. I'm going to go back over now that we've, come to the end of our our Havamal study. So off the top, I want to make sure I don't miss one here. I'm sorry, I'm reading back over a whole string of texts that Nick and I had. Here we go. Michael from Nordhoff likes to put his questions up front so he can hear them the following day, which is kind of cool. And he knows they're going to be at the tail end. He asks, could you both give us your opinions on meditation and how to best use it for one's own benefit? Svan, would you like to talk on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think meditation as a word is just interesting because of its placement within our usage of the word today. But I absolutely believe that it was part of our ancestors. Whether we think of it as, we could use the word contemplation. Sometimes it's kind of angled towards utsetya, like sitting out. A lot of people will argue that perhaps that isn't correct because that's about why you're sitting out and where you're sitting out. But I've thought about like translations, like the idea of maybe saying like uthuyur, like out of the mind, but I don't know if that would be incorrect. But it's stepping out of one's mind is interesting to me, and that's the way I've always kind of looked at it. Is your mind is racing, you step out of your mind to kind of tend it like a garden, third of yourself, or at least calm it down and place yourself in such a point of focus. But again, that's the purposing of meditation. Some people think of it as like recalling memories. Some people think about it as, again, tending your mind, focusing on the moment. Some people think about it as integrating or synthesizing with particular information, a rune or a verse or something, to calm their mind of everything, and then they totally absorb into one ideal. Does all of this have purpose and connection in our faith? 100%. I 100% believe it. It's just that the context of which it can be applied or said is up to debate. But the usage of the word meditation, even in modern sense, still holds. It has application. And we do it, whether it's, steadying ourselves, whether it's, again, separating from the mundane, having that moment of silence before going through that threshold. There's a lot of times in which the calming, the stilling, and the placement of the mind. So, like, again, I don't want to say or decree it, but being out of the mind doesn't necessarily have the same meaning as being out of your mind, like you've lost control. It's, again, more like stepping out of your mind and tending to it in a sense of solemn silence and meaningfulness of the moment, whether it's, again, focusing on breath. And I mean, people, like we talked about this earlier, people could say one thing or another. Oh, you're pulling from these traditions and that traditions, but we know that Ond is sacred. We know that it was given to us by Lord Odin, and Ond being that breath, the usage of, say, breath technique or breath practices perhaps have been cultivated in other traditions, whether it is Vedic or what have you, but creating our own and conceptualizing the idea of what meditation, breathing, and being intending to one's mind, stepping out of one's mind, intending it, could look like for our ancestors. I mean, not our ancestors, our descendants. What kind of traditions does Asatru have on its table in front of it that will eventually become these kind of long-standing traditions that perhaps have already been established by some older forms, but also too influenced by other things? We can look at those things and take inspiration from them and compare them and kind of use them to shape perhaps the water in the clay, if you will. But our job now is to build those traditions of what that might mean. And I don't think we should shy away from them. It's just what it could look like, whether it would involve mantra or rimur or song, And there was discussion about this weekend. Is there an ability for mantra and meditation to take form in an Asatru sense that doesn't mimic one for one the traditions of like the Vedic or perhaps the Persian Aryans, but instead is its own life and its own tradition built up? And you get a lot of people that are like, well, our ancestors didn't do that. It's like, no, we're talking about, we've got a lot of stuff, but we're going to focus it down into a way, and then it's going to grow from us to where our descendants will have it. And it will be then its, full intended purpose, or akin to the traditions that perhaps are unbroken in other branches. Yeah, it has absolute value. And I'm sorry, that was the nature of the question, right? Is there value in meditation?
Yeah, basically what you can use it for and how it works, and a little bit that way. And so I would say that your last statement about the people who want to be critical and endlessly there's a thing where you're like, wow, well, this isn't the authentic way that our ancestors used to practice, so we can't use it. Well, cool. Do you know the authentic way that our ancestors used to do their meditation techniques? Oh, well, no, you don't. Well, cool. So what should we do? Just stand around and not do anything? And whether people want to admit it, that is the conclusion. They don't decide to not do anything. They don't decide anything at all. They just get mired in inaction. That's a time that they could use meditation. Instead of sitting around thinking about all of the nonsense gnawing at their brain about scholastics and all this stuff, just sitting down and doing and letting go and engaging in the process is valuable. One thing that I think is interesting from our lore, and I've seen many people liken this to meditation in its expression, is Lord Odin sitting on Hlitskjalf and letting Hunan and Munin fly free. And he lets them fly through the worlds, and they come back and report to him at night. Literally thought and memory. He does, in essence, a form of freeing his mind and then recollecting it and reintegrating at a period. And I think there's definitely something to that. This is kind of, if I understand correctly, this is an evolution of a conversation that I saw in our men's group earlier as well, about the benefits of esoteric stuff versus direct acting in the world. And I think very much, and we could talk about that endlessly, that is hours and hours and hours of a subject to parse out all of the details on. But fundamentally, meditation, magic, those kind of esoterics are icing, and action in the world, deeds, are the cake. Icing enhances a cake, but it doesn't make the cake. You can have cake and no icing, and it's still really good. If you have icing and no cake, that's gross. And that's one of the things. Trouble is, and you'll even read this in esoteric texts, when you retreat from the world into your own little internal esoteric thing, it's very, very easy for you to get lost and untethered from reality. There's not a lot objectively to judge yourself by. And the line between authentic esoteric experience in the land of make-believe can be paper thin, and very often people wind up on the other side of it. That's where you see the phenomenon of the basement wizards. meditation should enhance your ability to live life and do deeds and accomplish things. There's a lot of ways to do it. I have trouble blocking out all of the nagging thoughts and things that would come into my head during a meditation. So I use Galder as mantra when I do it to get to that space where meditation is very worthwhile. In certain ways, I would be lying if I say I do that stuff all the time. I try to fully engage myself in action and in doing, because that soothes things that are nagging, and I think that accomplishes quite a bit. But there's a place as a seasoning, or as something that adds to a well-lived life full of deeds. But the one can't take the place of the other in terms of meditation, and esoterics can't take the place of action and of doing and of accomplishing. And we all know that to be true. You know, if you stand on one end of a football field and start casting spells at me, and I stand on the other end of the football field and I start charging at you, I will deliver a beat down way faster than you will cast magic missile at me. And I say that anyone who listens to this program knows that I talk about magic on here often, and it's not that I don't think that it has value, but all of the value is coupled with action and to enhance action. There's a whole lot of basement wizards that claim a lot of efficacy, that live in mom's basement, that are, 50-year-old virgins and have nothing to show for themselves. But in their own mind, they are, Gandalf or something. And that's unfortunate, and it's a tragic waste of potential. And I think that's one of the most tragic things of all, is wasted potential. Also from Michael from Jordshof, we have a question: is the bell at Thorshof functional? And if so, is it used to call the folk to worship? Absolutely, it is functional, and I usually use it. I did not use it this last weekend, and I thought about it a little bit after the fact. I'm not sure if folks there use it frequently. Svan, do you guys use that bell often?
Yes, we ring it 9 times, generally during the procession. We did use it this weekend, but you might not have heard it. But when the right before the wedding, when there was that 5 minutes to kind of press and all that stuff, and then I actually used the bell to kind of call the folks back in. Is for your message to the whites in relation to Bronze Age worship, especially with the waning gods, or the Vanir gods, and then to post-Christianity. A lot of the idea of, they would always say, like, church bells in Iceland, ups the land spirits, but I think there was already a long connection of the idea that the bells activate or kind of draw attention to the land spirits, or the Alvar, or the Hudurfolk, as they later became known. And again, Adam of Bremen noted that the priests of Frey had bells on their belts, and he is the lord of the Alvar, or the elves. So there's a lot of kind of connections, and I've always began most of my bloats with a ringing of the bells and a speaking or singing a prayer, and a galder with a spell at the end to the land spirits, letting them know that they're welcome if they're well, if they are wealful or joyful. But if they're woeful, then they have to go away. It's done in a polite sense, but a strong sense that, yes, we make this place our own, and it would do you well to know that we are calling the gods, and if you have ill intent, you should leave, because it will not be good for you. So that that ringing of the bells is important, and I've always kind of had it in my devotion to the gods. And I think it does go back to the usage of bronze and the usage of brass and the sacredness of sound. And so we use it, and it's kind of a combination of things. Again, it's a larger version of the small bell being rung. It's also a point to call the folk as they process from one building to the other, and in essence, they're leaving from the mundane threshold and entering the sacred threshold. And that's symbolic entirely. I mean, because we do have, after ceremonies and after bloat, the Vey is open for people to sit and talk and children to run around and play and all of that. But it becomes a different thing when the bell is rung and the procession starts, and the prayer to the Lamvetir, or the prayer to the the Svart Alvar and Dak Alvar and Leos Alvar is spoken. That's when it becomes serious.
Well, and it's also really cool to ring a 150-year-old church bell.
Yeah.
It's neat. It's this old antique bell in this functional bell tower, and those are more and more rare to have. And it's kind of a special thing about the antiquity of the building. So that's really kind of a cool extra that came with it. Just to kind of clear something up, because I think it's important, that I see over in the chat room. And I know the comment was in jest, but a spell is basically a prayer. So good luck finding a god that will cast fireball for you. So I want to make a slight difference in that. And to continue to nerd out on some stuff. If you look at spells, just like in nerdy stuff, there's wizard spells and there's cleric spells, and they work different. So there is invoking magical things by asking of the gods and beseeching them to help you with things. That's one thing that is valuable, and that very much is prayer. But there's also the wizard or the Vitki harnessing his own will through his understanding of the other, of the metaphysic, to implement his will into the world. One can do one of those or the other, but it's it's functionality. So I wanted to mention that a little bit. All of these spells that are taught in the poem are for you to make use of, as opposed to ask the All-Father to do these things for you. It's absolutely appropriate to pray and invoke the gods to ask their help with things. It's also valuable to try to harness your own spiritual efficacy to affect things. Both are good things and valid things to do. So the next thing we got is, what does the AFA think about pagan gods of the Greeks, such as Zeus, Heracles, or Poseidon? The AFA believes that the different gods in different Aryan pantheons are all reflections of the same Aryan divinity. I say all. There's obviously things that developed over time or perhaps were borrowed from neighboring things. But at its basic level, and the major gods are different reflections of the Aesir, as the Aesir were known to our most ancient ancestors. And as our folk moved through time and through location, they developed very distinct relationships and understandings of the Aesir in a way that may seem unfamiliar to those of us whose ancestors developed those relationships in different ways. It's important to realize that linguistically, there's a bit of logic to it. We're unaware of any point in time where, the gods, the Aesir marched down the rainbow bridge and said, hi guys, my name is Odin. My name is, Heimdallr. My name is. These are names that our folk attributed to or placed upon their gods because that is the best way they came to know them or came to describe them, or that's what those gods meant to them. And it's important to look at it in that context. It's also really interesting that linguistically, the names for different gods and different Aryan pantheons are often very similar, if not, derivative from the same roots, which is really interesting. Now, fleshing out completely where one, trying to go one for one of the Aesir as we know them with the gods of different branches of Aryan spirituality. There is some that is very obvious. The other, there's a lot of, it's very difficult to parse out what goes where, and it's not an exact science that way. But those other faiths and traditions have not survived, are not thriving, are not viable and functioning right now. Certainly not in the United States and most of the West. What is functioning and what we do know is beneficial and is a boon to us is worshiping and interacting with the Aesir under the Norse conception, the Norse stories, the Norse linguistics. That is how they have manifested to us, and the religion of our folk has been reforged. That's how that has worked. So it's under those terms that we move forward, and that's successful. That has been given the approval of the Aesir with, their blessings. We welcome members of the military, current and former,